Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Yashodanandanam Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare Jai Radha Madhav Kunj Bihari Jai Radha Madhav Kunj Bihari Jai Radha Madhav Kunj Bihari Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol Jai of Vishwabad Paramahamsa Pravajigacharya Ashtottara Shri Shrimad Srila Abhay Charanarand Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Rani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Harinama Sankirtan Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai ISKCON Vivithi Samsthapakacharya Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Gau Premanande All glory Sri Samadhavoti All glory Sri Samadhavoti All glory Samadhavoti All glory to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga Jai Shri Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishne Swadhamopagate Dhanamajnanadibhis saha Launashtatrishamisha Puranarko Dhunoditaham Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 10, Chapter 1. Today we're studying text number 54. Please repeat. Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Na Hi Asyaham Te bhayam saumya yat vai saha asharirvak putran samarpayasye asyaham yataham te bhayam uthitam. Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadva vaisaha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam. Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam. Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam. Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam.
Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam. Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam. Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam. Shri Vasudeva Uvacha Nahyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai saha sharirvak putran samarpayasyesyam yataste bhayamuthitam.
Shri Vasudeva Uvacha. Shri Vasudeva said, Na, not. He, indeed. Is it a little loud? Tasyaha, from Devaki. Te, of you. Bhayam, fear. Saumya, almost sober. Yat, which. Vai, indeed. Sa, that omen. Aha, dictated a shariravaak, a vibration without a body. Putran, all my sons. Samarparishye, I shall deliver to you. Asyaham, of her, Devaki. Yataham, from whom, te, your, hayam, fear, Putitam, has arisen. Translation. Vasudeva said, O best of the sober, you have nothing to fear from your sister Devaki because of what you have heard from the unseen omen. The cause of death will be her sons. Therefore, I promise that when she gives birth to the sons from whom your fear has arisen, I shall deliver them all unto your hand. Please repeat. Vasudeva said, O best of the sober, you have nothing to fear from your sister, Devaki, because of what you've heard from the unseen omen. The cause of death will be her sons. Therefore, I promise that when she gives birth to the sons from whom your fear has arisen, I shall deliver them all unto your hands. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Savior of the modern world, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Kamsa feared Devaki's existence because after her 8th pregnancy, she would give birth to a son who would kill him. Vasudeva, therefore, to assure his brother-in-law the utmost safety, promised to bring him all the sons. He would not wait for the 8th son, but from the very beginning would deliver to the hands of Kamsa all the sons to which Devaki would give birth. This was the most liberal proposition offered by Vasudeva to Kamsa. Om Jnana Timanantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yataparakamam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha. Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam. Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam. Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalata Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Taptakanchana Gaudangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Harpriye. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Madgavirapi Gopala Srikuryat Kripaya Yade Daivasam Payahapitva Krishya Yusta Priyadanaha. Vasudeva said, O best of the sober, you have nothing to fear from your sister Devaki because of what you've heard from the unseen omen. The cause of death will be her sons. Therefore I promise that when she gives birth to the sons from whom your fear has arisen, I shall deliver them all unto your hands. It's quite a promise here from Vasudeva. Can I have a show of hands of all the fathers in the room? How many of you would be willing to do this? So, and he's not only volunteering to do this, and he's not only volunteering the eighth son, he's volunteering unnecessarily all the sons. He really is, as Prabhupada says in his purport, the most liberal proposition he could offer. In a desperate situation, as we heard yesterday, one can take unusual steps as is necessary to protect Krishna or Krishna's interests. Here, this is what's at stake, and Vasudeva is ready to do anything. So, Kamsa feared Devaki's very existence. As they say, if there's no bamboo, then there's no bamboo flute. So this was his logic. Sridhar Swami says, Yad yatha asharini vagaha tatha hi nishchitam. Whatever was spoken by this unembodied voice, it's always an unembodied voice in the sky in these sorts of circumstances. And tatha hi nishchitam, that was definitely, it would be so, no doubt about it. Asya sakashat te bhayam nasti. But there was no fear from her directly. Yato yebhya putrebhyas te bhayamotitam. The fear in Kamsa has arisen from these whatever sons would give birth. They were not born yet. Vasudeva didn't know that he would have 8 sons. Just like he didn't know how he was going to get this child to Gokula later on. All he knew is that he had something to do, and it was clear what he had to do. And blindly he did this. Srila Prabhupada had a similar, if you want to call it a strategy. Against all the odds, Srila Prabhupada was prepared to, in effect, dive into the ocean and just, learn to swim. He came to New York City with nothing in his pockets, practically speaking. 40 rupees. What's that in New York? Not even $1 today. So he said he didn't even know when he got off the boat whether he should turn right or left. It's a little bit like if someone tells you, tomorrow you have to go to North Korea. You have to open up ISKCON in North Korea. It's that unlikely. So Vasudeva had a similar, his character is most wonderful, Vasudeva, Devaki. Remember, these are 2 persons who did austerities for how many thousands of years? I think 100,000 celestial years. That's really, really long. So when he saw that all the guards were asleep, he just took his chances and he did what he had to do. And then he saw that the Yamuna was there. And then within the Yamuna, the baby fell out of the basket, according to some. Imagine the anxiety. And here we see that it goes before that even. Here we see. He's so desperate that he's ready to kill all of his children. And what does Devaki think about that? Did he consult? So, Vasudeva and Devaki. It's a long history, actually. Anyone who has been to Guru Vayur, you maybe know the story that when Krishna appeared in the prison of Kamsa to Vasudeva and Devaki, this was his Janardana form. He appeared in this form, and of the 4-handed Vishnu. And they were afraid, and so they prayed that, if you should kind of disguise yourself so that Kamsa doesn't try to hurt you. This is how their Aishvarya Gyan was mixed with Vatsalya Bhava. That even though they know he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but still, especially Devaki, she's worried that he might get hurt. So this is a most wonderful love that they have for the Lord. And it didn't just come out of nowhere like this. They had executed hundreds and thousands of years of austerity, demigod years. And as Prishni and Sutapa, and the Lord appeared to them in the same form, four-handed Janardhan, which he was called Prishni Garbha. And then when they took birth again, as Kashyapa and Aditi, he appeared again in the same four-handed form, called Kapila Dev. I mean, to say he was the same four-handed form. So now we have the Krishna appearance, and again the same four-handed form, but he's turned into his real form, which is Krishna. So they have this idea that after Krishna appeared in this way, the original four-handed form that he appeared in was made into a deity. And Vasudeva and Devaki later worshipped that deity. And then when Krishna went to Dwarka, then Krishna took the deity with him. He inherited the deity, as it were, and the deity was worshipped there in Dwarka. But when Dwarka was submerged, Krishna made sure this deity, which was originally given by Lord Brahma to Prishni and Sutapa, this deity was not lost. He told Uddhava, make sure that when everything gets destroyed by the water, you have to convey this deity somehow or other to Brihaspati and Vayu. And Brihaspati and Vayu, when Uddhava finally found them, they located the deity, and then the instruction to Uddhava was that you have to find a place equal in sanctity to Dwarka and then take them there. So they looked all over India for a place, and they couldn't find such a place. They asked Narad Muni, he gave his advice. They came upon, who was it, Parashuram. And he also tried to help them out. Eventually they ended up in the very spot where the Prachetas had previously executed their austerities. If you read that passage of the Bhagavatam, you will find that it's quite consistent. So that place is considered to be, it's called Rudra Tirtham, the lake in which Rudra and Parvati were originally performing their austerities. So they ended up there. And then the party came with the deity, Brihaspati, Vayu, etc. And they were given instructions that this is, Lord Shiva greeted them, Parvati greeted them and said, this is the place where you should build your temple. We have our place here, our Bhajan Kuti is here, but we're going to move. And the place where Lord Shiva's moved to is now across from the Rudra Tirtha. The lake was very vast in the old days, but now it's a very small pond, maybe 200 feet across, square. And so he has his own temple there. Bhagavati or Parvati, she remained in the same temple, but she moved over and let Guruvayur Appa have the same place, middle, the main altar. So this was Leela, they say. Deity is still there today. You can go and see him and witness his magical smile and hopefully become captivated such that maybe someday we can also develop the same kind of love that Vasudeva and Devaki had. But that's not exactly the topic of today's verses. Here we see what is Vasudeva promising, and how does someone make such a promise as that? It's inconceivable. Vasudeva was known to be an honest person, we're going to hear tomorrow. And on account of that famous honesty, Kamsa trusted everything that he said. It's like if Yudhishthira Maharaj tells you that Ashwatthama has died, you believe it, because Yudhishthira doesn't tell lies. So Vasudeva's character was unimpeachable in that way. And this is what we see. He's promising to give all of his sons, over and above the call of duty, as we say. So Jiva Goswami also says, he's calling Kamsa by what name here? Huh? Soumya. Soumya. What does Soumya mean? undisturbed, peaceful. Is this the situation in which Kamsa was undisturbed? He was completely agitated, ready to murder his sister in cold blood. Vasudeva couldn't even believe it. And we heard yesterday that I didn't look at the sense control that Vasudeva had, that although his mind is reeling with anxiety about what to do, he's smiling very peacefully, talking and praising his brother-in-law, who happens to be a shameless, cruel, a merciless demon, yes. So, peaceful Kamsa. In order to show inner happiness, a sarcastic meaning of these words is not evident, as it was in the previous speech. Or, another way to look at it, Jiva Goswami says, it can indicate that because of the fear arising in Kamsa, his courageous nature had disappeared, and Vasudeva wanted to remind him by way of praising him. So I offer you her sons, from which no fear should arise. Te abhayam. Or another way of looking at it, because here Jiva Goswami is looking at this in at least 3 or 4 different ways. Here's a third one. I offer you her sons, excluding whom someone else will give you fear. So he talks in this way because he didn't want Kamsa to be fearful. The more fearful Kamsa is, the more dangerous the situation is for Vasudeva. So he's trying to pacify the situation by all means. Now he gives us what we call a patantara, a different reading. Here in the BBT text we have yataste bhayamuttitam, but in other readings, Jiva Goswami points out, we hear instead yataste bhayam agatam. This is the same, more or less the same meaning. Your fear has arisen or your fear has arrived. Either way, it doesn't make any difference. Okay, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur then, he says, Asharira Vak, the unembodied voice, said, according to the message heard in the sky, he's defining this, he's glossing the word. Asharira Vak means an unembodied voice. According to the message heard in the sky, you need not fear Devaki, but her 8th child. Don't worry, I'll give you all 8 children. Then you can kill the 8th child whom you fear. Or if you wish, you can kill all of them. Pretty amazing. So we're seeing again. Yesterday we saw some sort of a breach of Vasudeva's moral character in that he was praising Kamsa and cajoling Kamsa and doing whatever he could to allay Kamsa's fears. Here we see him delivering on his morality. He's not going to lie, and he's going to deliver these children. In due course of time, we'll see that he does that very thing. It's unthinkable. Our Shastras are full of examples of people that we should emulate, and they're also full of examples of people that we should not emulate. Anyone who's in the Grahastha ashram, next time you're furious with your wife or with your husband, just consider what happened when, who was it, Shantanu married Ganga, correct? And her condition is that you cannot become angry at me no matter what I do. And then he had to see every time she gave birth, she would take the child and throw the child into the river. And he had to take that. Similar example we saw in less noble character, Yayati Maharaj. That was the condition. So yam hina vyasyantyete purusham purusharshapha sama dukham sukham jiram somritataya kalpate. Early on in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells us, you have to do this first before you can relish the ecstasy of Ras Lila and Manjari Bhava and what other Siddha Deha and whatever things people entertain, especially when they go to Vrindavan, where I live. I see it all the time. The first thing Krishna says you have to get down is this, that If somebody's threatening your children, are you going to be disturbed about it? Or are you going to be peaceful about it? Pretty heavy stuff. We can look on the internet and see just how upset people get when there's allegations of child abuse. This is the question. So, what makes a person moral? Core moral values they're internal. They're not necessarily external. As we've mentioned yesterday, I think that Patanjali posits the existence of some human faculty that we have called the dharmendriya. It's a sense that the animals don't have. It's internal. It's inside. And we also mentioned that it's unenforceable. You can't really force someone to be moral. Laws are only laws. We have laws where love has already failed. Just like Srila Prabhupada not constantly, but very often, Srila Prabhupada was telling us that you have to establish love and trust amongst each other in order to have cooperation. And there's no preaching Krishna consciousness, or there's no point in spreading what we think is Krishna consciousness if we can't cooperate with one another. And whatever it takes to cooperate is what we have to focus on with as much attention and sincerity as Vasudeva was focused on his task, which at the time was to ensure the incarnation of the Lord, as well as to protect his wife. Nowadays in Western countries, people are so confused and fallen that they don't even think that their wives need to be protected. They don't even think they need to have wives. They don't even consider that they have to stay with the same gender in a relationship, and they can't even define how many genders there are. That's how bewildered one can become in this material world. Believe it or not, there was a court case that actually made it to the Supreme Court in the United States in which somebody was arguing for their right to use a woman's bathroom. This is frightening. It should be as frightening as Kamsa was to Vasudeva, because it's not any less heavy. The threat of atheism in the modern world is so all-pervasive and so unthinkably powerful. Next time you have a tufan here, I think in this part you don't get so bad monsoons, but if you're in a coastal area, it can be very bad. Or if you get tsunamis, for example. Unless you're in Tiruchendur. Tiruchendur is exempt from tsunamis. You know this? That was a benediction given, that Lord Skanda's temple will be untouched. And in 2004 it was untouched. Everything on both sides of the temple was destroyed. But the temple itself, no problem. Untouched. How do you consider that? If you've been there, you know the temple ends right about maybe 12 feet from the water. Right on the ocean. Anyway, that's another matter. But the point is, we're talking about the power of Maya. Once a devotee found Srila Prabhupada praying very intently in front of the deity. And just out of curiosity, sometimes we can't really ask these questions, but this devotee did. He asked Srila Prabhupada, what were you praying for? And Srila Prabhupada answered, I was simply praying that I may not fall victim to the material energy, Mahamaya. Srila Prabhupada prayed like this. So we should, and Prabhupada many times actually, he said that your problem is that you're not sufficiently afraid of Maya. But Maya can do some wondrous things, some adbhuta things Maya can do. So we should be afraid. So we have to have a sense of dharma involves an internal conviction, and that dedication to that ideal is not enforceable. It has to be self-imposed. Just like in Hindi we say, mujhe karna chahiye ya mujhe karna padega. One of the things is that you should do something. The other thing is you have to do. You have no choice. You're forced to do it. So this is an internal compulsion, but it's very powerful as well. And it can be as powerful as the material energy if we cultivate it, but it has to be cultivated. And we have examples throughout the Bhagavatam of devotees who had such high character. Now, how do we cultivate it? Do we make an artificial attempt by saying that I'm going to be honest, or I'm going to be, sense controlled, or whatever? That's okay. But actually the fact is that simply by focusing on surrendering to Krishna in all sincerity, these qualities all come. Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavatya kinchana sarvair gunais tatra samasate suraha harava bhaktasya kuto mahadguna manorathenasati dhavato bahihi. That means that just by practicing ahaituki bhakti means bhakti that has no agenda, no personal thing involved. You're not giving some to Krishna and keeping some for yourself. And all such calculations, we have to kick them out. That's called kaitava dharma. Prabhupada said once, we sweep them all out. So when we have that ahaituki bhakti, all the good qualities of the demigods come and stay. And the commentators on that passage make a very enlightening insight. Why does it say that the demigods sarvai gunais tatra samasate suraha? Samasate suraha. They come, that's wonderful enough. Anyone here ever seen a demigod in person? Raise your hand. To even meet a demigod is actually it's quite a wonderful thing. But if that demigod comes to you and wants to live with you and permanently, that's really, really wonderful. Samasate suraha. This is how they define. They come and they stay. Why do they come and they stay? Because demigods, what do they have to do? We were talking about internal compulsion and external compulsion. They have an internal compulsion to do their duty, because that's how you become a demigod in the first place. What is it? Urvam gachanti sattvastha. When you cultivate things that are sattvic and dharmic, you go up. Madhye tishtanti rajasaha. When you remain passionate and keep putting things south for yourself, then you stay here. And adho gachanti tamasaha. Jaganya guna vrtistha. When you are abominable and do things that are censurable, you're going down into the animal world. And that's another one of these frightening aspects of the material world, because you're locked in. Once you lose the opportunity of a human birth because of thinking and acting like animals, then you're locked into that paradigm in your next life, because Prabhupada said death means you go to sleep as a human being and you wake up as a dog. You go to brush your teeth in the morning and you look in the mirror and you have this snout instead of wow. And you try to call your wife and alarm her that there's a problem. And the only thing that comes out is whoop, whoop, whoop. How shocking. And you can't even do anything because you don't have hands anymore. You have to do everything with your face when you're a dog. Think about it. It's serious business. And Prabhupada said this modern civilization is a dog and cat civilization. As we said yesterday, the elevator door opens and it's all dogs, and you're invited to join them. Or mukal ara, clueless goats. So, human form of life is very serious business. While we can, we have to make the most of it, and we have to understand how to make the most of it. It's a strategy, actually. You can't just expect that you're going to get Krishna bhakti so easily, or at least it has to be recognized that if you want Krishna bhakti, there are certain stages that you go through, and this is described in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, and it's further elaborated by Srila Rupa Goswami and many other acharyas. Adau Shraddha, for example, you have to have faith first. Do you really have faith? How's your faith? How much faith do you have? How much faith is being given to Krishna, and how much faith is being invested in some other person or in some other thing? That's a question we all have to ask ourselves, and we have to ask that question every day because we can change. Sangat sanjayate kama, according to the association that we embrace, we will change. And so we have to, Bhagavatam says, as long as we have not awakened our sense of real Vasudeva Katha Ruchi, that means Sthai Rup mein Vasudeva Katha Ruchi, then we have to cultivate things that are in the mode of goodness. So, otherwise, this is a very scary proposition. If you lose the opportunity of a human birth, one Hindi Braj poet in the 16th century said, "Jaba lagatana mein tapana vyape, taba lagakari hari seva." As long as your body is in good working order, you have proper intelligence and health is an important thing. Make it your first priority. Srila Prabhupada said, health first, sadhana second, service is the third priority. If you lose your health, then you know how important it is. Chanika Koktilia said, if you lose money, that's not a problem because you can always gain money back. As we mentioned the other day, Prabhupada said it's just flying through the air. You have to catch it. That's all. If you lose your health, that's a problem because it's not so easy, especially if you're going through Ayurveda. Everybody knows Ayurveda takes forever to fail because most of the doctors are quacks or cheaters. Ayurveda works if the doctor wants it to work. That's another way of putting it. But if you lose your health, it's a problem because you will struggle to regain it. It's a hard work. Everybody knows Ayurveda is a super hassle and it takes a long, long time. But if you have a good doctor who cares and you're disciplined enough to follow it, it definitely works kandipa every time. So, but the third thing he warns against, Chanakya, is that if you lose your character, then everything is hopeless. Character. Character is the doorway through which you enter human life, really. A real human life is not biologically defined. It's defined in terms of adherence, obedience to dharma. And this was Vasudeva's character. Because he was a pure devotee, we said already, it's not that you have to artificially cultivate all these things, but if you are selfless and sincere and serious about practicing Krishna consciousness, then they will automatically develop all such good qualifications, automatically. There are so many case studies, and I can name them, in ISKCON. People I know, people I've seen change. So, it requires only Tivra Bhakti. Tivra Bhakti. So, this was Vasudeva's history, and therefore we see the result. Prabhupada said there is no opulence that a human being manifests in this world that does not have a long history of tapasya behind it. And we've already mentioned twice the kind of tapasya that he and his wife performed with the purpose of having Krishna as their child. And Krishna benedicted them in that way. Now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry. But if we keep our health, if we keep our character, then we can practice Krishna consciousness with minimal obstruction we mentioned yesterday. Yesham tvantagatam papam ityadi. We don't need to say more about that. So Vasudeva was very, very exemplary character in this way. Sometimes we see people have different values, and we've already mentioned that a value is something with intrinsic worth. It's an end in itself, and it's not just a means to something else. It's not that I'm going to be honest because people call me a liar if I'm not honest. There's an internal compulsion which we already explained. Many values are not necessarily moral. Also, this is another thing. Political, economic, aesthetic, etc. These things are not necessarily moral, but a code of ethics tries to establish what's right, and many people translate the word dharma as ethics. Once I was curious, and I just went through all of Prabhupada's books, looking at all the different ways in which Srila Prabhupada himself translated the word dharma. I found at least 24 of them. 24. Well, what do we say about dharma? What does it mean? It means your prescribed duty. That's probably the most practical, and therefore it comes first into our minds. What else is it? The intrinsic property of a thing. That's a more scientific definition. Sankhya looks at it like that. For example, the dharma of sugar is sweetness. The dharma of water is liquidity. So we have the Jaiva dharma. The Sanatana dharma of the jiva is this service attitude. And its functional, mundane manifestation comes in the form of normative dharma. That is to say, dharma that is prescribed duty. Or moral obligation is another. Ethics is another way. Dharma is many, many different ways. Now, the problem is that it's all these things at once. And that's why the Westerners in particular have to realize that they have a disadvantage in Krishna consciousness because they can't figure this out. It's just not so clear until someone explains it very explicitly. And that doesn't always happen so much. So an institution has to have a code of ethics. And it has to be formulated not in order to achieve some short-term goal, but in order to assure what Krishna calls the loka sangraha of the institution. What does loka sangraha mean? In chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. Loka sangraha mevapi. Anybody know? Yes? So what does... we can translate loka sangraha, social solidarity. Does that sound like something we can use in ISKCON? Or in Salem? Yes. We all want to be on the same page. We all want to cooperatively serve the spiritual master without fighting over him while we're massaging him and giving pain to him. So a code of ethics is a good way to start that. People have different values. People from, especially I'm seeing all different races here and all different cultures and backgrounds and ages and everything. We're all different. Sometimes we make assumptions about other people that are not necessarily well-grounded because the variety of human consciousness is so great that it's beyond our imagination and sometimes even comprehension. So we have to communicate very well in order to understand where another person is at until we get that kind of empathy that characterizes devotees of Vasudeva's stature. And we've already mentioned many times now that empathy is very important. And Krishna also says so in Bhagavad Gita. So, if you have shared values, that may be coincidental. But it's not very likely. There's going to be a clash of values. Many years ago, the GBC said that we have problems in ISKCON because there's either competition over limited resources. What's an easy word for that? Irshya, envy. Or we have a clash of values. A clash of values is a little more serious. To have some hundreds, thousands of people in ISKCON with all the same value system, that's almost miraculous. It doesn't happen. And so what happens is that, the set of ethics for the institution is basically up for grabs for whoever's the most vocal and powerful. It's a kind of a, free-for-all, which is not so auspicious. That's why we said the other day that when Prabhupada told us at the end of 1977 that two things I want you to do, one is cooperate and the other is stay in the institution, he gave us the means for doing so, and that is dharma. And not just varnashram dharma. When you're dealing with people who don't even understand the meaning of the word dharma, you cannot communicate to them any specific kind of dharma because they don't have the basic concept, the adhara. This is the problem with 90% of the world. Therefore, please understand why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told you, and I'm speaking to the Indians here, Bharata bhumite hoilo manushya janmajar janmashartha kori porupar. Porupar means after you assimilate Krishna consciousness to a respectable and functional degree, you have an obligation to make sure that the rest of the world understands this. And that's not easy. It's what Ramanujacharya calls in his commentary on Bhagavad Gita 4.10, tapasya. Well, Krishna himself in that very verse calls it tapasya, but Ramanuja and all the others following him say that it means, first of all, you have to accumulate this knowledge, which is hard enough because we don't read except Facebook. And we, having accumulated that knowledge, you have to make choices about what you've heard. Am I going to do this or not? Am I going to surrender to Mahamaya or am I going to surrender to Yogamaya? Your choice. Yatechasita Thakuru, nobody forces you. It's an internal compulsion. So, and then finally, even if you can get that far, you've accumulated knowledge, you've surrendered to that knowledge, that's called Janma Sarthakari. Then you have another obligation, and it's a third austerity, Poroparupakar. Why is it austere? Because the audience is often not willing to accept what you have to say. Kind of like an alarm clock. I always give this analogy. If you set your alarm clock, let's say for 1:30 a.m., nobody likes to get up at 1:30 a.m. if they've gone to bed at a respectable hour. So, yeah, you just want to hit the snooze button. And this is how people react. And this is why people twist and twangle the philosophy of Krishna consciousness into bizarre, grotesque, psychedelic manifestations of what it was meant to be. So it's austere knowledge. And Ramanujacharya and others say that we have to embrace that austerity and we have to do something for the world. Indians can do this better than anyone else because even though Indians have the wrong concept of dharma quite often, and increasingly so, they at least have some idea that you should respect your parents. For example, there are universal moral principles that the whole world embraces. For example, take you parachute yourself into any spot on the earth, and you'll find yourself in X location, and then steal something from the first person you meet and see what happens. So certain things are very general. There are universal values. This is another point, because quite often you see people, and especially in not even in the West anymore, modern people, we can say, Adhunik Log, they actually sometimes say there is no absolute truth, but there is. I've just proved it. Go slap someone in the face and see what happens. It's expected. You should be nice to people. You should not steal. You should not, so many things. But dharma is a different thing. Dharma is coming from Shastra Yonitvat. Said already. It's so important to consider that books are the basis. Shastra Yonitvat. And this is where we get our understanding. And this is where we get our conception of what it means to be a human being. And this is where we are inspired, how we are inspired, from where we are inspired, to practice dharma, which further enables us to perfect our Krishna consciousness and then preach Krishna consciousness throughout the world. We have a lot of work to do. But Prabhupada gave roughly 80% of his instructions on this topic in the last 3 years that he was with us. Dharma. You can, for one example that's very cogent, you can look up in the database February 14th, 1977 conversation in Mayapur, wherein we see that actually Srila Prabhupada's own disciples and his leaders among those disciples, they are arguing with him about why we can't do Varnashram. They're arguing. And that psychology is still there, I'm sorry to say, in many of us. So we have a lot of work to do, but Srila Prabhupada has given us everything that we require. But it's going to start with the books. We have to just, Prabhupada always used to criticize, you think these books are only for distributing, but they're for reading also. Someone like Vaisheshika Prabhu, have you invited him here yet? You need to. Because he understands this. He reads every day, sometimes for over an hour, and publicly with other devotees, just so that, his example is better than his precept. So we really have to put our noses into Srila Prabhupada's books and try to understand, really, what is he saying? So that our illusions are dispelled, so that our disagreements are pacified. Swasti astu vishwasya kala prasidatam. That's how it happens. And the same word is used through ahaituki bhakti. This is Prahlad's prayer. His character was comparable to that of Vasudeva here. He says, Swasti astu vishwasya. May the whole universe be pacified. That may instantly create some sandeha. That, well, wait a minute. If the whole universe is empowered, then that means the demons are also empowered. Therefore, he says, Kala prasidatam, but the demons should be pacified. Now, how are you going to pacify a demon? He says, what is the next line? Anybody know this verse? Jayantu bhutani shivam mithodya. By thinking of each other's welfare. Do we do that? Paradukha dukhi? We're actually paradukha sukhi. For your information, I can't resist knocking the Communist Party of China. I always do it. Their literature explicitly says that if you're put into a disadvantage, you have to make sure that everyone around you has that same disadvantage. Otherwise, you'll not be able to maintain your position. You can possibly see how envious it is. So envious. This is communism. And the literature of Marx and Lenin actually say these things, and many worse things that you'd be surprised to know. So, kala prasidatam jayantu bhutani shivam mithodya. May I only think well of others and only wish well for others. Raise your hand if you pray for other people every day. Do you do this? We should. This purifies our own hearts also. So one can naturally question, how in the world is a demon going to do this? And so he says, manashta bhadram. The mind has to become auspicious. Bhadram karne bhishriyama deva. Have we heard these words from the Shruti mantra? You should hear auspicious things. You should see auspicious things. You should remember auspicious things, do auspicious things. And in this way, you are what you do. You become auspicious. Yesterday we saw, he called Kamsa sin. Kamsa is not mentioned by name in yesterday's verse. He just called him sin, papam. You are what you do. So if you do auspicious things, you become auspicious. Manascha bhadram bhajatarat hokshije. By worshipping at hokshijab. This is how a demon can be pacified. And this is how the whole universe becomes auspicious. And this is how we think of each other's welfare. And this is how our minds become auspicious. But he goes further. Anyone can serve Krishna, that's fine. I just came from Guru Vayur, and all kinds of people are worshipping Krishna. The karmis are going there, the bhaktas are going there, the gyanis, the mayavadis, everybody all together worshipping. But he says, Aveshyatam no matir api ahaituki. The same word he uses. May we enter into this spirit ahaituki, without any personal motive. This is pure devotional service as Rupa Goswami defines it. Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karnamadhyana vrtamanukulyena krishnanushivanam. This is the bhakti that you get once you're liberated. Param bhakti. Mad bhaktin labhate param. So it has to be a haituki, and in the beginning that takes discipline. And that really requires association more often than not. So it's a long road we have to traverse, and we should constantly pray for the blessings of our superiors every day. How else can we move? It's only through mercy, only through blessings. Anyone who thinks he can do anything in life without blessings is a fool. So for 10,000 or 100,000 years, Vasudeva and Devaki were executing austerities. They developed their character, they developed their Krishna consciousness, and they got their boon that they desired, which was to have the Lord as their son. And he's still standing there today. If you go to Guruvayur, you can see him. And I highly recommend that, because it's his darshan is a sight that you cannot unsee, as they say. Stays in the mind, hopefully. All right, so I'm going to stop here. Na hyasyaste bhayam saumya yadvai sahashajiravak putran samarpayasye sya yataste bhayamuttitam. Vasudeva said, O best of the sober, you have nothing to fear from your sister Devaki, because what you've heard from the unseen omen, the cause of death will be her sons. Therefore, I promise that when she gives birth to the son from whom your fear has arisen, I shall deliver them all into your hands. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any questions or any comments? Yes. Microphone.
Hare Krishna. Guruji, as the son of Aditi and Kashyap, Krishna appeared in the form of Vaman Dev.
Yes.
As we heard in all the three births, Krishna appeared in four-handed form.
Yeah.
So is it so that Vaman Dev also first appeared as four-handed form
Yeah.
and then transformed?
I was afraid you were going to ask this question. I don't know the answer. I don't have an explicit reference that I can prove that, but that's the indication that I get. Certainly as Prishni Suttapa, that was the case. As Vasudeva and Devaki, that was the case. And it is said, for what, Sthala Puranas or Janashruti has, Aitihim has to say about things like this. It is said that the deity was worshipped by each of these three sets of devotees in each of their incarnations. The same deity, who is now in Guruvayur. That's what they say. So at least in that form, he was there in its forehand form. But, whether he changed his form as he did in the prison of Kamsa, I don't know. Okay. Anything else?
Prabhuji, you spoke about this empathy, and one of your lectures a long time back, I heard that you spoke about, His Grace Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu had spoke about empathy, something like God's gift.
I asked him, where does it come from? And he shrugged his shoulders and said, it's a gift from above. And it's true. It's not something you can practice. It's not a skill. As we said, it's an internal thing. It's not something that you can enforce someone. We mentioned already that when love has failed, that therefore we need laws. That's why primitive religions, which I won't mention, they're very, very law-oriented, because they don't know how to cultivate love. The Abrahamic faiths in general, without naming any one of them. But one of them is known, everybody knows. It has jagged borders, which means they fight with everybody they contact. And they're very violent, because it's primitive. They don't have a process to develop what's in the heart, potentially, of every living being. And so, they remain bound by law, and they think that that's the end-all and be-all of their spiritual attainment. It's very neophyte. So, empathy is not something you can practice or even you can learn from someone. It's a gift. It's one of these things that comes One of these sarvai gunais tatra samasate sura, when the demigod comes and sits in your heart. I didn't explain this adequately. The acharyas commenting on that verse from the 5th canto say, the reason the demigods come and stay in your heart is because they have an obligation, an external obligation. They don't really have a choice in the matter. If they're demigods, once they're demigods, they have to perform their duty. If you do your sacrifice, they have to give you the result. They don't have any say in the matter. It's not like if they're in a bad mood or if they don't like you, they're not going to give it. They have to do it. They're compelled. And so they have to go to these rascals who are executing sacrifices, and they have to give them what they want. And they're thinking, we don't really like this engagement, but, we're on the clock, as they say. It's a job. We have to do it. But with a devotee, it's different. With a devotee, they can see because they're very intelligent and very perceptive and have much more fine senses than we have. So with a devotee, they recognize, especially a Haituki Bhakta, this person is very special. This is a sadhu. Even I can benefit from his association, so I want to come and I'm going to stay in his heart. That's why the devotee has these permanent qualities. This is the commentary. And not just one quality, all the qualities. And the demigods who manage such things, they all come and stay in the heart of a devotee because they want that association. That's pretty amazing. And the devotee's qualities, being personally vouchsafed by the devatas themselves, they don't go away. It's not like the temporary manifestation of some pseudo-qualification that comes as a result of your past good karma. It's not at all comparable to that. When we say manorathenavati dhavato bahihi, the first time I read that, I thought, this is really fanatical. This thing is saying that only the devotees are good and everybody else is bad. That's what it says, actually. But there's science behind it. There is science behind it. And you can't explain this to a person who's not subtle enough in their acumen and in their character to really get it. But there is science behind it. The so-called good qualities of the non-devotees, they're temporary because they are only a manifestation of karmic reaction that a demigod is obligated to provide. But with a devotee, it's a very different thing. What to speak of Krishna, who wants to bless the devotee with his divine grace in such a form? Even the demigods who are working under Krishna, they also want to do the same thing. So it's really different. So it's a gift from above. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm not even sure what your question is. Is it okay?
That's what.
No, okay. Anything else? If not, then we can end here. Thank you all very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.